the ancient world left behind clues to its wonders and haunting evidence of its greatest unsolved mysteries. In this journey, we will follow those clues into the heart of the unknown, from a lost army swallowed by the sand to a machine that should not exist. Chapter 1. The Lost Army of Cambyses. Our first journey takes us to the vast, timeless, and unforgiving expanse of the Egyptian Sahara. It is a place of immense silence, an ocean of sand where the sun beats down with a relentless fury. It is a place that swallows all things. The shifting dunes can cover a traveler's tracks in minutes, a caravan in hours, and, if the legends are to be believed, an entire army in a single, terrifying afternoon. Our only guide for this story is the man known as the father of history, the ancient Greek historian Herodotus. And the story he tells is one of imperial arrogance, divine retribution, and 50,000 men who marched into the desert and simply vanished from the face of the earth. The year is 525 BC. The mighty Persian Empire, under the rule of its ambitious and ruthless king, Cambyses II, has just conquered the ancient kingdom of Egypt. Cambyses, son of the legendary Cyrus the Great, is a man of immense power, but Herodotus paints him as a king prone to fits of rage and madness, with a deep contempt for the traditions of the people he now ruled. He tells us that in his fury, Cambyses committed the ultimate sacrilege. He stabbed and killed the sacred Apis bull, a creature worshipped by the Egyptians as a living god. Having conquered the Nile Valley, Cambyses set his sights on expanding his new African empire. He devised a grand, three-pronged campaign. One army would march south, down the Nile, to conquer the wealthy kingdom of Kush. Another would attempt to attack the powerful city-state of Carthage. But the third expedition was born not of strategy, but of anger. Cambyses had received a prophecy from the famous and deeply respected Oracle of Amun, located at the remote Siwa oasis deep in the western desert. The prophecy was unfavorable to his rule. Enraged, Cambyses decided he would not just conquer the oasis, he would wipe it from existence. He dispatched a force of 50,000 soldiers with a single chilling order: to destroy the Oracle of Amun and enslave its priests. Imagine the sight of this great army as it assembled in the ancient capital of Thebes. 50,000 men, a formidable force of Persian infantry and cavalry, drawn from every corner of their vast empire. Their armor would have glinted in the Egyptian sun, their banners snapping in the dry desert wind. They were a cog in the most powerful military machine the world had yet seen, confident and certain of their victory. Their journey began, as all desert expeditions did, by following the established caravan routes. They marched for 7 days across the desert, arriving at the large and well-known oasis of Karga. This was the last outpost of civilization, a place of water and shade before the true, unforgiving wilderness began. Here, the army replenished its supplies, and from here, according to Herodotus, they marched west into the vast open desert known as the Great Sand Sea. Their destination, the Siwa oasis, was another 7 days' march away, across a barren and featureless landscape with no landmarks and no water sources. They were marching into oblivion, and it is here that the historical record falls silent. Herodotus, in his histories, tells us what he was able to learn from the people of the oases. He writes that the army set out from Karga and marched into the desert, and then they were simply gone. He says, "It is certain that they did start on their march against the Ammonians and reached the oasis. But after that, except for the Ammonians themselves and those who heard the story from them, no one can say anything about them. The people of Siwa, the Ammonians, told Herodotus what had happened. They said that as the Persian army was about halfway across the desert, a great and terrible wind rose up from the south. This was the Simoom, the poison wind, a colossal sandstorm that can blot out the sun and turn the day to a terrifying red-hued night. Imagine the scene. The sky turns dark, the wind begins to howl like a demon, and a moving wall of sand, thousands of feet high, appears on the horizon, racing towards you. There is nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The air becomes thick and unbreathable, filled with stinging, choking sand. The temperature soars. Visibility drops to zero. You are lost in a roaring, chaotic vortex of sand. Herodotus writes that the great storm fell upon the army as they were having their midday meal. And when it was over, the entire army of 50,000 men, along with all their horses, camels, and equipment, had vanished, buried beneath the immense shifting dunes. Not a single man survived. Not a single trace was left behind. For 2,500 years, that was the entire story. A tantalizing and chilling tale from an ancient historian. Many modern scholars grew skeptical. Was it even true? Was it a myth? A cautionary tale about the folly of defying the gods? Perhaps the army was not buried in a single dramatic storm, but was simply picked apart by the harsh realities of the desert. A lack of water, a lost route, and harassment by desert tribes. The sandstorm, they argued, was just a dramatic excuse to cover up a colossal military blunder. The lack of any physical evidence, no bones, no armor, no Persian arrowheads, seemed to support their skepticism. The desert kept its secret. The legend, however, never died. It became a holy grail for explorers and archaeologists, a romantic quest to find the final resting place of a lost army. For decades, expeditions have searched the Great Sand Sea, but the shifting dunes have yielded nothing. But in recent years, a pair of Italian archaeologists, brothers Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione, have presented intriguing new evidence. After years of studying ancient texts and geological surveys, they proposed a different theory. The army, they argued, did not get lost in the middle of the desert. They believed the sandstorm story was an embellishment, and that the army was ambushed and destroyed much closer to their destination by forces loyal to the Oracle of Siwa. Near the oasis, they discovered a number of Bronze Age weapons, pottery, and hundreds of human bones and arrowheads scattered across a large area, which they identify as Persian from the correct time period. While their findings are still hotly debated by the wider archaeological community, they offer a tantalizing possibility that the fate of the army was not a single, supernatural act of nature, but a desperate and successful human defense of a sacred place. But whether they were swallowed whole by a monstrous wave of sand, or whether they fell in a forgotten battle at the edge of the oasis, the end result is the same. 50,000 men marched into the silence of the Great Sand Sea, full of imperial pride and a belief in their own invincibility. And they never came out. Their story remains a chilling testament to the power of the desert to erase all things, and one of the greatest, and perhaps darkest, unsolved mysteries of the ancient world. Chapter 2. The Antikythera Mechanism. We often imagine the ancient world as a place of simple tools and profound philosophy, a world of marble statues and bronze swords, of grand ideas but rudimentary technology. But what if a piece of that world was discovered that defied all our expectations? A piece of technology so complex, so sophisticated, that it simply should not have existed for another 1,500 years. This is not a tale of speculation, but of a real object, a ghost of a lost knowledge, a clockwork computer from the ancient world. Our story begins in the year 1900, in the turbulent waters of the Aegean Sea, near the small Greek island of Antikythera. A group of Greek sponge divers, taking shelter from a violent storm, decided to explore the seafloor in this new, uncharted area. One of the divers, Elias Stadiatis, descended into the depths, his vision obscured by the primitive copper helmet and the single air hose that connected him to the world above. He reached the bottom, some 150 feet down, and as his eyes adjusted to the murky twilight, he saw something that made his blood run cold. He frantically signaled to be pulled up, and when he broke the surface, he was pale with terror, babbling to his captain about a horrifying sight, a shipwreck, its floor littered with the rotting corpses of men and horses. The captain, believing the diver was hallucinating from the immense pressure, decided to investigate himself. He descended and found the shipwreck, just as Stadiatis had described. But the bodies were not of flesh and bone. They were of bronze and marble. They were statues, the magnificent cargo of an ancient Roman-era vessel that had met its end on the rocks 2,000 years before. This discovery sparked the world's first major underwater archaeological excavation. For nearly a year, the sponge divers, with incredible bravery and at great personal cost, would descend again and again, recovering a breathtaking hoard of ancient treasures. They brought up magnificent bronze statues, including the famous Antikythera philosopher, beautiful marble sculptures, ornate glassware, and pottery. And among this priceless cargo, they recovered a strange, unassuming lump of corroded bronze, roughly the size of a large book. It was thought to be a rock, or perhaps a piece of armor. It was sent to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, along with the other treasures. And for 2 years, it sat in storage, largely forgotten. Then, one day in May of 1902, something strange happened. The corroded lump, slowly drying out after 2 millennia in the sea, spontaneously split apart, revealing something impossible. Inside the calcified rock-like exterior were the faint, unmistakable outlines of gear wheels, with tiny triangular teeth and faint circular inscriptions. The museum staff were baffled. Nothing like this had ever been found from the ancient world. Complex, precision-engineered gear trains were a technology believed to have been invented for the great astronomical clocks of the medieval cathedrals in the 14th century. To find them in a Greek or Roman artifact was like finding a jet engine in the tomb of a pharaoh. It made no sense. For decades, the object remained an enigma, a strange footnote in the story of a spectacular shipwreck. The true breakthrough in understanding the mechanism had to wait for the technology of the 21st century. An international team of scientists subjected the fragile, crumbling fragments to the most advanced imaging technology of our time. They used custom-built X-ray scanners and high-resolution surface imaging to peer inside the corroded layers, to digitally reconstruct the device without ever touching it. And what they found was breathtaking. Piece by piece, the digital reconstruction revealed a clockwork of incredible complexity. The device had consisted of at least 37 interlocking bronze gear wheels, cut with a precision that was astonishing. When a knob on the side of its original wooden case was turned, this intricate system of gears would drive a series of dials on the front and back of the device. It was a portable, hand-cranked model of the cosmos. The front dial was the public face of the heavens. It had pointers that showed the position of the sun and the moon against the backdrop of the zodiac, as well as the 5 planets that were known to the ancient Greeks. It was a sophisticated, mechanical calendar that could tell you the date with perfect accuracy. But the dials on the back were where the true genius of the device was hidden. Here, 2 large spiral dials revealed the deep astronomical knowledge of the Greeks. One dial tracked the 19-year Metonic cycle, a complex astronomical period used to reconcile the movements of the sun and the moon, and to regulate the civil calendar. The other spiral dial was even more extraordinary. It was an eclipse predictor. By aligning the pointers, the user could predict the exact date, the time, and even the likely color of upcoming solar and lunar eclipses. It also indicated which years would hold the great Pan-Hellenic Games, including the Olympics. The most incredible feature of all was the way the device modeled the movement of the moon. The ancient astronomers knew that the moon's speed varies as it orbits the Earth. To model this complex variation, the creator of the mechanism used a brilliant system of epicyclic gearing, with one gear wheel riding on another, a system that included a pin and slot device that functioned as a differential gear. This was a level of mechanical sophistication that was thought to have been invented in the 16th century, and yet here it was, in a device that had been lost to the sea in the 2nd century BC. The discovery answered the what, but it opened up a series of even more profound and unsettling questions. Who could have possibly built this? The shipwreck was Roman, but the inscriptions on the device are in Greek, confirming its origin. It may have come from an academy founded by the philosopher Posidonius on the island of Rhodes, a place where the great astronomer Hipparchus, who discovered the precession of the equinoxes, had worked. Was this a unique masterpiece, the creation of a single forgotten genius? Or were devices like this common in the ancient world, and this is simply the only one that, by a miracle of chance, survived? And the greatest mystery of all, what happened to this knowledge? If the ancient Greeks were capable of building a mechanical computer in the 2nd century BC, why did this incredible technology completely vanish from the face of the Earth? Why was the next known device of similar complexity a great cathedral clock built in Germany over 1,000 years later? The Antikythera mechanism is a technological ghost. It is a single miraculous survivor that offers us a tantalizing and humbling glimpse of a lost world of ancient genius. It proves that the great minds of the Hellenistic world were not just philosophers and poets, but master engineers, capable of modeling the heavens with a clockwork precision we thought was a product of our modern age. It is a beautiful, complex, and silent reminder that history is not always a simple, straight line of progress, and that the past still holds secrets that can challenge everything we think we know. Chapter 3. The Silent Cities of the Indus Valley. In the grand narrative of the ancient world, we are taught that civilization was born in 2 great river valleys, the Nile of Egypt and the Tigris-Euphrates of Mesopotamia. But at the very same time these empires were building their pyramids and their ziggurats, a third, equally magnificent civilization was flourishing, spread across a vast territory in what is now Pakistan and northwest India. This was the Indus Valley, or Harappan civilization. It was one of the three great cradles of humanity, and yet, for millennia, it was completely erased from our history. Its story is one of the greatest puzzles in archaeology. They built some of the largest and best-planned cities of the ancient world. They established trade networks that stretched for thousands of miles. They developed a unique and beautiful writing system. And then they vanished, leaving behind almost no clues as to who they were, what they believed, or why their world came to an end. This is the mystery of the silent civilization. For nearly 4,000 years, their world lay buried and forgotten. The great mounds that concealed their cities were seen as little more than hills. In the 1850s, British engineers building a railway line through the Punjab region discovered that one of these mounds was made of countless high-quality baked bricks. Seeing a convenient source of building material, they proceeded to quarry the ancient city of Harappa, using its 4,000-year-old bricks as track ballast, unknowingly destroying a priceless piece of human history. It was not until the 1920s that formal archaeological excavations began, and the true scale of what had been lost was revealed. As archaeologists dug into the mounds at Harappa and a second, even larger site called Mohenjo-Daro, the Mound of the Dead, they were stunned. They were not unearthing scattered villages, but massive, meticulously planned urban centers that were unlike anything they had ever seen. Let us walk through the ghostly streets of Mohenjo-Daro. The first thing you would notice is the incredible sense of order. The city was laid out in a near-perfect grid pattern, with broad main streets running north-south and east-west. This was not a city that grew organically over time. It was planned and built with a powerful central vision. The buildings were constructed not from irregular mud brick, but from millions of standardized mass-produced baked bricks, all of a uniform size and shape. But the true genius of these cities, the feature that set them apart from any other in the ancient world, lay beneath the streets. The Indus people were masters of water management. Nearly every single house, from the largest courtyard homes to the smallest two-room dwellings, had its own private well, a dedicated bathing area, and, most astonishingly, its own private flushing toilet. These toilets were connected by a network of covered, brick-lined drains that ran beneath the main streets, carrying waste away from the homes and out of the city. This was a level of urban sanitation and public hygiene that would not be seen again in most parts of the world for another 4,000 years, until the age of the Romans, or even the Victorians. At the western end of the city stood a raised fortified area known as the Citadel. Here, archaeologists found the foundations of large public buildings, including granaries for storing surplus food. The most impressive structure is the Great Bath. It is a large rectangular public pool, nearly 40 feet long, built with incredible precision and made completely waterproof with a lining of natural tar. It was likely a place of ritual purification, a sacred pool at the heart of the city. But just as fascinating as what the archaeologists found is what they did not find. In Egypt, the landscape is dominated by colossal temples to the gods and magnificent tombs for the pharaohs. In Mesopotamia, We find grand palaces decorated with reliefs of warlike kings and their conquests. In the Indus Valley, there is almost none of this. There are no definitive royal palaces, no great temples to individual gods, no grand statues of all-powerful rulers. There is very little evidence of warfare. Their cities were fortified, but we have found very few weapons. Their society appears to have been remarkably egalitarian, peaceful, and orderly. But the source of its authority remains a complete mystery. And this leads us to the heart of the enigma: their writing. The Indus people have a voice, but we cannot hear it. They left behind thousands of beautiful artifacts, most famously small, square seals carved from soapstone. These seals bear exquisite, intricate carvings of animals: elephants, tigers, rhinoceroses, and most common of all, a powerful bull that looks like a mythical unicorn. And above each animal is a short line of elegant, abstract symbols. This is the Indus script. It is a complete, fully developed writing system, but to this day, no one in the world can read it. There is no Rosetta Stone to unlock its meaning. The inscriptions are also incredibly short, usually no more than 5 or 6 symbols long, which makes it nearly impossible for computers or cryptographers to find patterns. We do not know if it was an alphabetic, syllabic, or pictographic system. Because we cannot read their writing, we do not know the names of their kings or their gods. We do not know their literature, their prayers, or even what they called their own magnificent cities. They are a great, anonymous civilization, a people without a name. The final mystery is the greatest of all. Why did it all end? Around 1900 BC, after more than a millennium of stability and prosperity, this vast and orderly civilization began to decline. The great cities began to empty. The sophisticated trade networks collapsed. The art of writing was forgotten. And over the course of a few centuries, the Indus Valley civilization simply faded away. For many years, the leading theory was that they were destroyed by a violent invasion of Aryan tribes from the north. But extensive archaeological work has found no evidence for this. No layers of ash, no battle-scarred cities, no signs of a widespread conquest. The invasion theory has now been largely abandoned. The current leading theory points to a more subtle and perhaps more relentless enemy: climate change. Scientists have found evidence of a major shift in monsoon patterns around that time. These changes would have severely disrupted the river systems that were the lifeblood of their agricultural society. The Ghaggar-Hakra River, which was once a mighty waterway that fed many of their cities, dried up and vanished. Faced with persistent drought, crop failures, and famine, the people of the Indus Valley likely began a slow, gradual migration away from their great urban centers, dispersing into smaller villages and eventually being absorbed by other cultures. Their end was not a dramatic, fiery collapse, but a slow, quiet fading. And so, the Indus Valley civilization remains one of history's greatest enigmas, a world of incredible order and sophistication that rose from the plains, flourished in a peaceful and prosperous state for 1,000 years, and then vanished, leaving behind only the silent ruins of its clean, well-ordered cities, and the beautiful, unreadable script that holds the secret to their story. A secret that, for now, they are keeping to themselves. Chapter 4. The Nazca Lines. The Nazca Desert of southern Peru is one of the driest and most desolate places on the face of the earth. It is a vast, flat, and empty landscape of rock and sand, a place where rain may not fall for years at a time. To a traveler on the ground, it is a monotonous, rust-colored wasteland, stretching to the horizon under a brilliant, unforgiving sun. And yet, this seemingly empty plain holds a secret, a colossal and mysterious art gallery that is completely invisible to anyone walking upon it. For etched into the surface of this desert floor are hundreds of gigantic drawings, geoglyphs of animals, plants, and perfect geometric shapes, so enormous that they can only be truly seen and appreciated from high in the sky. These are the Nazca lines. For centuries, their existence was a secret known only to the wind and the sun. The local people of Peru knew of them, but their true scale and form were impossible to grasp from the ground. It was not until the 1920s and 30s, with the advent of aviation, that their mystery was revealed to the modern world. Pilots flying commercial routes between Lima and the city of Arequipa would look down from their cockpits and be astonished by what they saw. Below them, the desolate landscape was crisscrossed with perfectly straight lines that stretched for miles, as if a giant had drawn them with a ruler. And among these lines were the unmistakable, gigantic figures of animals: a spider, a monkey, a hummingbird. The first scholars to study the lines, like the American Paul Kosuk, were baffled. They realized these were not natural formations, nor were they irrigation channels or ancient roads. They were something else entirely, a deliberate and massive work of art, a message of some kind. But the person who would become the true guardian and interpreter of the lines was a German mathematician and archaeologist named Maria Reiche. She arrived in Peru in the 1940s and dedicated the next 50 years of her life to the lines, tirelessly mapping, measuring, cleaning, and protecting them from destruction. She lived in a small hut in the desert, becoming known as the Lady of the Lines, and it is through her patient, lifelong work that we began to understand the scale of this ancient marvel. To truly appreciate the Nazca lines, one must imagine a slow, silent flight over the desert plateau. The first things you would notice are the geometric shapes. There are over 13,000 perfectly straight lines, some running parallel, others intersecting, creating a complex and confusing web across the landscape. Some are thin, single lines, while others are the wide, cleared paths of massive trapezoids and triangles, some hundreds of feet wide, looking like strange, monumental runways. The precision of these lines is breathtaking. Many of them run perfectly straight for up to 5 miles, deviating from their course by only a few feet. And then, woven into this geometric tapestry, are the biomorphs, the great figures of living creatures. There are around 80 of these magnificent drawings. There is a hummingbird, its wings frozen in mid-flap, over 300 feet long. There is a great spider, so biologically accurate that scholars have been able to identify its species, measuring 150 feet. There is a monkey with a distinctive spiraling tail. There is a whale, a lizard cut in two by the later construction of the Pan American Highway, a condor with a wingspan of over 400 feet, and a series of strange humanoid figures, including one on a hillside with large staring eyes, often nicknamed the astronaut. Each one is drawn with a single, continuous, unbroken line. For years, the question of how a pre-industrial people could create such massive and precise figures without the ability to fly and see them from above was a source of wild speculation. But the method, it turns out, was ingeniously simple. The surface of the Nazca Plain is made of a dark, rust-colored rock, a desert varnish created by millennia of oxidation. But just a few inches beneath this dark surface lies a much lighter-colored, sandy subsoil. The Nazca people created their masterpieces simply by removing the top layer of dark pebbles, exposing the bright, contrasting earth underneath. The line is simply a shallow, cleared pathway, often no more than 4 to 6 inches deep. And the reason they have survived for nearly 2,000 years is due to the incredible climate of the region. There is almost no rain to wash them away, very little wind at ground level to erode them, and the mineral-rich ground has created a hard, stable surface. As for their precision, archaeologists have demonstrated that these huge figures could be created with simple surveying techniques. Using wooden stakes and long lengths of rope, the Nazca artists could have laid out a small, manageable version of the design, and then used basic geometric principles to scale it up, section by section, with remarkable accuracy. They did not need to see the entire figure from above to be able to execute their plan on the ground. But the greatest mystery of all remains. Why? Why would a culture invest such a colossal amount of time and effort to create an elaborate art gallery that they themselves could never fully see? For whom were these giant messages intended? Maria Reich, the Lady of the Lines, dedicated her life to the theory that they were a giant astronomical calendar. She believed that many of the lines were aligned with the rising and setting of the sun, the moon, and important stars at specific times of the year, like the solstices. The lines, she argued, were a great celestial observatory, a way for the Nazca to track the seasons and predict the best times for planting and harvesting, a crucial concern in such an arid environment. More recent theories, however, have shifted the focus from the sky to the ground. The most prominent modern theory suggests that the lines were sacred, ritual pathways. The Nazca people were obsessed with water and fertility. It was their constant and overwhelming concern. Many of the animal figures, the hummingbird, the spider, the monkey, are symbols associated with water, rain, and fertility in Andean mythology. It is now believed that the Nazca people would walk along these lines in great ceremonial processions. The act of walking the sacred path of the spider or the condor was a form of prayer, a ritual performance on a massive scale, designed to call upon their gods to bring the precious, life-giving rain. Other theories suggest the lines point to sources of underground water, or that they were connected to shamanic spirit journeys, the figures representing the animals and spirits a shaman would encounter in a trance. The truth is, we do not know for sure. The Nazca lines remain a breathtaking enigma. They are a unique form of monumental art, a testament to a lost culture's faith and its deep connection to the land. Unlike the pyramids or the Parthenon, these were not monuments to be looked at, but monuments to be looked from, perhaps by the gods they hoped to please, or to be experienced by the people who walked their sacred paths. And so, the great, silent figures lie patiently in the desert, etched into the skin of the earth, waiting under the sun and the stars. Their true purpose, a beautiful and profound secret they have kept for 2,000 years. Chapter 5. The Voynich Manuscript. In the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University, there sits a modest centuries-old book. It is small, about 9 inches tall, bound in a soft, plain vellum cover. Its pages are filled with an elegant, flowing script and hundreds of colorful, hand-drawn illustrations. At first glance, it looks like any other medieval text. But this book, known as the Voynich Manuscript, is perhaps the single most mysterious and frustrating object in the entire world. It has no known author, no verifiable title, and it is written in a language or a code that, despite a century of intense effort by the world's greatest cryptographers, has never been deciphered. It is a book that speaks, but we cannot hear it. Its modern story begins in the year 1912, when a Polish-American rare book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich was visiting a Jesuit college, the Villa Mondragone, just outside of Rome. In a dusty chest of old books, he found this strange and unique manuscript. Tucked inside was a letter, dated 1666, which traced a small part of the book's strange history. It had once belonged to the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, a great and obsessive collector of curiosities and occult objects, who believed it was the work of the famous 13th century English scientist Roger Bacon. It had been studied by alchemists and scholars in the 17th century, and it was even rumored to have once belonged to John Dee, the famous magician and spy to Queen Elizabeth I. For years, its true age was a mystery, but recently, modern carbon dating of its vellum pages has proven that the book itself was crafted sometime between the years 1404 and 1438. It is a genuine product of the early Renaissance, but this only tells us the age of the pages, not when the strange words and pictures were drawn upon them. The heart of the mystery is the script itself. The entire book is filled with an elegant flowing text, written with a quill pen. It is clearly not random scribbling. The characters are consistent, and they are grouped together like words and sentences with paragraphs and punctuation. It follows the statistical patterns of a real language. Some words are very common, others are rare, and the letters are distributed in a way that suggests a genuine linguistic structure. And yet, the alphabet itself is completely unknown. It consists of 20 to 30 unique characters, some of which resemble Latin or alchemical symbols, but most of which are unlike anything seen in any other text. For over a century, the world's greatest code breakers have thrown themselves at this puzzle, and all of them have failed. During World War II, a team of legendary American cryptographers, led by William and Elizabeth Friedman, who had famously broken Japan's Purple Code, took on the Voynich manuscript as a side project. After decades of work, they were forced to admit defeat, concluding that any attempt to crack it without more information was, in their words, doomed to utter frustration. The script has resisted every form of cryptographic, linguistic, and even AI-powered analysis. If the words are a mystery, the illustrations they accompany are even more bizarre. The manuscript appears to be divided into 6 sections, each one more baffling than the last. The first and largest section is an herbal. Each page features a large, colorful drawing of a single plant, surrounded by the mysterious text. But here is the problem. The vast majority of these plants are completely unidentifiable. They appear to be strange hybrids, chimeras of the botanical world. A plant might have the roots of one known species, the leaves of another, and the flower of a third. or it might be a fantastical creation that bears no resemblance to any plant on Earth. The next section is astronomical or astrological. It is filled with complex circular diagrams, wheels of stars, suns, and moons, often with figures in the center. They seem to be charts of the heavens, perhaps zodiacs, but they do not match any known celestial configurations. Then comes the strangest and most famous section, known as the balneological, or the bathing section. These pages are filled with drawings of small, naked female figures, often with swollen abdomens, wading and bathing in a series of elaborate pools and channels. The pools are connected by a bizarre and intricate plumbing system, with tubes and pipes that seem to flow through strange, organ-like structures. The green liquid that fills these pools is a mystery, as is the purpose of these strange, communal, and exclusively female scenes. Other sections appear to be cosmological, with more abstract diagrams and maps, and pharmacological, with drawings of isolated plant parts like roots and leaves, next to what look like apothecary jars. The final section is a solid block of text, with small star-like flowers in the margins, perhaps an index. So what could this strange book possibly be? There are 4 main theories. The first is that it is a complex cipher, that the text is a known language, like Latin or a German dialect, that has been encrypted with a code so brilliant and so layered that it has yet to be broken. The second theory is that it is a glossolalia, the written version of a lost or an artificial language. Perhaps it is the only surviving text from a forgotten culture. Or perhaps it is a constructed language, a complete linguistic system invented by the author, like the Elvish languages created by J.R.R. Tolkien. The third theory is that the entire manuscript is a brilliant and elaborate hoax. Perhaps a clever forger in the 15th or 16th century created this beautiful, meaningless object to sell to a wealthy and gullible patron like Emperor Rudolph II. If it is a hoax, it is a work of genius, as it has fooled linguists and cryptographers for centuries. The final, and perhaps most poetic theory, is that it is a work of outsider art, that it is the personal, idiosyncratic creation of a single, unknown visionary, perhaps a mystic or an alchemist, who was not writing for an audience, but was simply documenting their own private, internal world. A world with its own unique plants, its own strange heavens, and its own mysterious rituals. A world that was never meant to be understood by anyone else. And so, the Voynich manuscript remains a perfect enigma. It is a book by an unknown author, with no title, written in a language we cannot read, filled with illustrations of a world we do not recognize. It is a beautiful, silent, and deeply frustrating artifact, a testament to the fact that some secrets of the past are so well kept that they may remain lost to us forever. Chapter 6. Stonehenge, the mystery of the Megaliths. On the vast green and rolling expanse of the Salisbury Plain in southern England, a ring of colossal stones stands in silent vigil against the sky. They are weathered by 4,000 years of wind and rain, ancient, gray, and profoundly mysterious. This is Stonehenge, the most famous and enigmatic prehistoric monument in the world. It is not a ruin of a city or a palace, but a sacred circle, a prehistoric cathedral built by a people who possessed no writing, no metal tools, and no wheel. Its very existence is a miracle of engineering and a testament to a forgotten faith. And it poses 3 of the greatest questions in all of archaeology. Who built it? How did they achieve such a feat? And why? To understand Stonehenge, we must understand that it was not built in a single moment of inspiration. It was a project that spanned over 1,500 years, a sacred site that was built, dismantled, and rebuilt in several distinct phases by different cultures. Its story begins around 3000 BC, in the late Neolithic period. The first monument was not a stone circle, but a great circular earthwork, a henge. Early Britons, using simple tools of bone and antler, dug a massive circular ditch and bank, over 300 feet in diameter. Within the bank, they dug a ring of 56 pits, which we now call the Aubrey Holes. We do not know for certain what these pits held, perhaps great wooden posts, or perhaps they were the first home for a ring of sacred stones that were later moved. We do know that, for a time, these pits were used for human burials, marking this as a sacred, ceremonial space from its very beginning. For 500 years, the earthwork stood, its purpose shifting with the generations. But then, around 2500 BC, the most ambitious and mystifying phase of construction began. The age of the great stones had arrived. The first stones to be brought to the site were the so-called blue stones. These are the smaller stones of the monument, though small is a relative term, as each one weighs between 2 and 4 tons. The true mystery of the blue stones is not their size, but their origin. Geologists have proven, with absolute certainty, that they come from only one place on Earth: the Preseli Hills in western Wales, over 150 miles away from Salisbury Plain. The builders of Stonehenge somehow quarried these massive stones and then transported them on an almost unbelievable journey over mountains, through forests, and across treacherous waters. It was a feat of logistics and raw manpower that remains one of the greatest puzzles of the ancient world. But the blue stones were just the prelude. Soon after, the most iconic and colossal elements of Stonehenge were erected: the Great Sarsen Stones. These are the giant, upright stones and the lintels that rest upon them, which form the famous outer circle and the inner trilithon horseshoe. These are monoliths of a different scale entirely, with the largest weighing up to 50 tons. They were quarried from a site called the Marlborough Downs, about 20 miles to the north. Imagine the scene. Thousands of people, working with nothing more than heavy stone hammers or mauls, pounding away at the sandstone bedrock to hew out these colossal blocks. Then came the slow, brutal journey of transporting them. They were likely loaded onto huge wooden sledges and then dragged inch by agonizing inch across the landscape by hundreds of people, using ropes of plant fiber, a path lubricated by animal fat or guided by wooden rollers. Once at the site, an even greater challenge began: raising them. The builders would dig a massive pit for each upright stone, with one side angled as a ramp. The great stone would be dragged until its base slid down the ramp into the pit. Then, using a complex system of wooden levers, A-frames, and sheer brute force, hundreds of people would heave on ropes, slowly, painstakingly, pulling the colossal stone into a vertical position. But their genius did not end there. To place the heavy lintel stones on top, they likely built enormous timber platforms around the uprights, or perhaps used a massive, gently sloping earthen ramp to allow them to drag the lintels up and into their final resting place. And with a sophistication that is utterly baffling for the Stone Age, they did not just place the stones. They carved them to fit together, using techniques borrowed from fine woodworking. They carved protruding tenons on the tops of the upright stones, which fit perfectly into mortise holes carved on the underside of the lintels, creating a strong and stable joint. The lintels of the outer circle were even fitted together with tongue and groove joints, locking them into a secure, continuous ring. For centuries, the question of who possessed such skill and devotion was a mystery. Legends attributed the monument to Merlin the magician, or to giants. But the archaeological reality is just as fascinating. The builders were the native peoples of Neolithic and Bronze Age Britain. From the vast ceremonial landscape that surrounds Stonehenge, we have begun to understand them. Not far from the stone circle lies the site of Durrington Walls, where a massive settlement was discovered, a village of hundreds of wooden houses. This is believed to be the place where the builders of Stonehenge lived. Archaeologists have found the remains of great feasts there, suggesting that thousands of people would gather from all across Britain to participate in the construction, not as slaves, but as a form of sacred duty or a great act of communal celebration. They built their homes for the living out of wood, a temporary material, but they built their great monument for the ancestors and the gods out of stone, a material for eternity. This leads to the greatest question of all. Why? Why did they invest such an enormous amount of energy and resources to build this magnificent structure? The answer is likely not a single one. Stonehenge was almost certainly a place of many purposes. It was, without doubt, a great temple of the sun and moon. Its most famous feature is its precise astronomical alignment. On the day of the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, a person standing in the center of the circle can watch the sun rise directly over the outlying heel stone. On the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, the sun sets in the exact opposite direction, its last rays shining through the heart of the great trilithons. It was a celestial clock, a stone calendar that marked the turning of the great cosmic wheel of the seasons. It was also a place of the ancestors, a great cathedral for the dead. The landscape around Stonehenge is one of the densest concentrations of Bronze Age burial mounds, or barrows, in all of Europe. It was the heart of a vast ritual landscape, a place where the world of the living could connect with the world of the spirits. And finally, it may have been a place of healing. The blue stones, brought from so far away, were clearly special. In Welsh folklore, these stones were believed to possess magical healing properties. The discovery of burials at Stonehenge containing individuals with signs of severe illness or injury, some of whom had traveled great distances, suggests that it may have been an ancient site of pilgrimage, a prehistoric Lourdes, where people came in the desperate hope of being healed by the magic of the stones. And so, Stonehenge is not a single mystery, but many. It is a solar temple, a stone calendar, a tomb for the elite, and a place of healing. But above all, it is a testament to the ingenuity, the devotion, and the deep spiritual lives of a people who left no words, only this breathtaking and eternal puzzle of stone, silently watching the sun rise and set, just as it has for over 4,000 years. Chapter 7. The Lost Legion. At the heart of every Roman legion was its soul, its sacred embodiment of the power and honor of Rome. It was the aquila, the eagle, a gleaming standard of gold or silver, carried into battle by a legion's most trusted soldier, the aquilifer. To the soldiers of the legion, The eagle was a divine object, a symbol of their unbreakable spirit. To lose the eagle in battle was the ultimate and most profound disgrace, a stain upon a legion's honor that could never be erased. It is a story of one such legion and one such lost eagle that has become one of the most enduring legends of the Roman Empire. This is the story of the Ninth Legion. Legio Nona Hispana, the Ninth Spanish Legion, was one of the oldest and most respected legions in the entire Roman army. It was a tough, veteran unit, whose history stretched back to the great campaigns of Julius Caesar in Gaul. They had fought across the known world, earning a reputation for tenacity and discipline. In the year 43 AD, they were one of the 4 legions that spearheaded the Roman invasion of Britain, a wild and hostile island on the very edge of the known world. For the next 70 years, the Ninth Legion was stationed in Britain, fighting countless battles, pacifying rebellions, and pushing the frontiers of the empire ever northward. Their last known station was at the great fortress of Eboracum, modern-day York. From here, they were the guardians of the northern frontier, responsible for keeping the peace and defending Roman territory from the fierce, unconquered tribes of Caledonia, what we now call Scotland. To the Romans, this was a land of mist, of dark forests and rugged highlands, inhabited by a fearsome, blue-painted people they called the Picts. It was a place of constant, low-level guerrilla warfare, a hostile and unforgiving landscape that was the very edge of the Roman world. And it is here, around the year 108 AD, that the historical record of the Ninth Legion begins to go quiet. The last verifiable inscription bearing their name in Britain was found on a rebuilt fortress gate in York, dated to that year. After that, they simply disappear from all records of the Roman army in Britain. And from this silence, a powerful and dramatic legend was born. The story, made famous in the 20th century by Rosemary Sutcliffe's novel, The Eagle of the Ninth, goes like this. Sometime around the year 117 AD, a great and terrible uprising of the northern tribes occurred. The Ninth Legion, a force of over 5,000 disciplined soldiers, was given its orders. They were to march north, beyond the frontier, into the misty wilds of Caledonia, to crush the rebellion and restore Roman honor. Imagine the scene. A long column of Roman soldiers, their red shields and segmented armor, a stark contrast to the green and gray landscape. They march out from the safety of their fortress, leaving the civilized world behind, following a rough road into the dark, unknown forests of the north. The air is cold and damp. A thick mist clings to the trees, and the only sounds are the rhythmic tramp of their sandals and the jingle of their equipment. They are marching deep into enemy territory, where the hostile Caledonian warriors are watching from every shadow, waiting for their moment to strike. The legion marches further and further north, and then they are ambushed. In a narrow glen surrounded by high hills, the Caledonian tribes descend upon them in a furious, chaotic wave. The Romans, masters of open-field battle, are caught in a trap. Despite their superior discipline and armor, they are overwhelmed. The legion forms a circle, a desperate last stand, but they are cut down to the last man. The sacred eagle is captured, and the Ninth Legion is utterly and completely annihilated, swallowed by the mists and the fury of the northern tribes. This legend seemed to be supported by 2 key pieces of historical evidence. First, the complete absence of the Ninth Legion from any further records in Britain. And second, the fact that the very next emperor, Hadrian, visited Britain in the year 122 AD and ordered the construction of his Great Wall, a massive permanent fortification stretching from one coast to the other. To many, the conclusion seemed obvious. Hadrian built his wall because the Ninth Legion had been so catastrophically destroyed that Rome had decided to abandon the conquest of Caledonia forever, choosing to build a defensive barrier to keep the unconquered barbarians out. It was a story of imperial hubris, of a heroic last stand, and it became one of the most romanticized tales of the Roman Empire. But is it true? For the last several decades, historical and archaeological detective work has painted a very different and perhaps less romantic picture. The first major problem with the legend is that no Roman historian, not even Tacitus, who wrote extensively about Britain, ever mentions the annihilation of the Ninth Legion. The loss of an entire legion was a major catastrophe, an event that would have sent shockwaves through the empire. For it to go completely unrecorded is highly unlikely. Then came the archaeological discoveries that changed everything. In the city of Nijmegen, in the modern-day Netherlands, archaeologists have found tiles and inscriptions bearing the stamp of the Ninth Legion. Crucially, these artifacts date to the years after 120 AD, a time when the Legion was supposed to have already been destroyed in Scotland. This evidence strongly suggests that the Ninth Legion was not annihilated in Britain at all, but was simply transferred from its posting in York to a new one on the Rhine frontier, a common and routine practice for the Roman army. Further, more fragmentary, evidence suggests they may have been moved again, this time to the volatile eastern frontier of the empire. Some historians believe the Ninth Legion met its final end, not in the cold mists of Scotland, but under the hot sun of the Middle East, perhaps being destroyed during the brutal Bar Kokhba revolt in Judea around 132 AD, or in a later, unrecorded war with the powerful Parthian Empire. In these chaotic and poorly documented conflicts, the records of a single legion's demise could easily have been lost to history. So, the modern consensus is that the dramatic story of the Ninth Legion's last stand in Scotland is a myth, a powerful legend created in modern times to explain a simple gap in the historical record. And yet, the legend endures, far more powerful and famous than the likely historical truth. Why? Because it speaks to a deep and primal fear and fascination. It is a story of a great, disciplined, and civilized force marching into an unknown, untamed wilderness and being completely swallowed by it. It is a story of the limits of empire, of the boundary between the known world and the mysterious darkness that lies beyond. So, while the historical soldiers of the Ninth Legion most likely packed their standards and marched to a new posting on the Rhine, their ghosts have been forever claimed by the North, and in our imagination, the legendary Ninth Legion is still marching, forever lost in the cold, misty highlands of ancient Scotland, a silent, ghostly army in one of history's most captivating tales. Chapter 8. The Giants of Easter Island. In the heart of the Pacific Ocean, over 2,000 miles from the coast of South America, and more than 1,000 miles from the nearest inhabited island, lies a place of extreme and profound isolation. It is a tiny speck of land, a volcanic triangle of just 63 square miles, named Rapa Nui by its inhabitants. To the rest of the world, it is known as Easter Island. And on this most remote of all islands, a forgotten people accomplished one of the most remarkable and perplexing feats of engineering in human history. They carved, transported, and erected nearly 1,000 colossal stone statues. The Moai, giants of volcanic rock that stand in silent, enigmatic watch over the barren landscape. The existence of these magnificent statues on such a small and isolated island presents two of the world's greatest mysteries. First, how did a small Stone Age society, with no wheels, no draft animals, and no metal tools, create and move these monolithic giants? And second, and far more hauntingly, what happened to the thriving, complex civilization that built them? A civilization that had vanished into poverty and ruin long before the first Europeans arrived? The story begins around the year 1200 AD with one of the greatest feats of human exploration. A small group of Polynesian voyagers, guided by an almost unbelievable knowledge of the stars, the currents, and the flight of birds, set out from their homes in eastern Polynesia in great double-hulled outrigger canoes. They sailed for weeks across the vast, empty expanse of the open Pacific, until, against all odds, they found this one tiny, undiscovered island. The Rapa Nui they found was not the barren, grassy landscape we see today. It was a subtropical paradise, covered in a dense forest of the world's largest species of palm tree, a land rich with birds and fertile volcanic soil. Here, they established a new home, and for several hundred years, their population grew, and their culture flourished in complete isolation from the rest of the world. And at the heart of their culture was a deep reverence for their ancestors. They believed that their chieftains were descended from the gods, and that their spiritual power, their mana, could continue to protect and provide for the community long after their death. To honor these deified ancestors, they began an extraordinary ritual of statue building. These were the Moai, carved from the soft, compressed volcanic ash, or tuff, of a single quarry at the Rano Raraku volcano. The Moai are monolithic figures, representing the torsos and heads of these honored ancestors. They are famous for their distinct features: a heavy brow, a prominent nose, elongated ears, and a stern yet peaceful expression. They were carved to be placed upon great stone platforms, or ahu, which were built along the coastline, and almost all of them were made to face inland, their gaze directed towards the villages of their descendants, as if to watch over them. The scale of this undertaking is staggering. The average Moai stands about 13 feet tall and weighs 14 tons. But the Rapa Nui people were constantly competing, each clan trying to outdo the other by building an even larger and more impressive statue for their ancestors. The largest Moai ever successfully erected on an ahu was over 33 feet tall and weighed over 80 tons, the weight of a modern space shuttle. In the quarry at Rano Raraku, an even larger, unfinished Moai lies attached to the bedrock. Nicknamed El Gigante, it would have stood nearly 70 feet tall and weighed an astonishing 270 tons. For centuries, the question of how a small, isolated society moved these giants for miles across the island's rolling terrain without the aid of wheels or animals baffled the world. Early theories suggested they were rolled on a ladder of logs, using the island's once abundant palm trees. But a more recent and compelling theory, backed by archaeological evidence and successful experiments, suggests a more remarkable method. The statues were made to walk. By tilting the statues upright and using teams of people pulling on ropes, it was possible to rock the statues from side to side, creating a shuffling, walking motion that allowed them to be moved, step by painstaking step, across the landscape. The oral traditions of the Rapa Nui people themselves have always maintained this, saying that the statues walked from the quarry. Once at their ahu, the great statues were raised and their final sacred details were added. Their eye sockets were carved out, and eyes of white coral with pupils of red scoria were placed in them, an act that was believed to activate the statue's magical power. And on the heads of the most important moai, a second massive stone carving was placed. A pukao, a giant hat or topknot of red volcanic stone, which could weigh up to 12 tons itself. For several hundred years, this was the great, all-consuming obsession of the Rapa Nui people. Their society was a complex and thriving one, with a population that may have reached as high as 15,000 people, all organized into clans competing in this feverish and resource-intensive ritual of statue building. But their isolation and their obsession would ultimately be their undoing. The construction and transport of the moai required a vast amount of resources, most importantly, timber and rope from the great palm forests. As the clans competed to build ever larger statues, the rate of deforestation accelerated. The last great palm tree on Rapa Nui was eventually cut down. This was the tipping point that led to a catastrophic societal and ecological collapse. Without the trees, they could no longer build their great ocean-going canoes. This meant they could no longer hunt for the porpoises and deep-sea fish that had been a staple of their diet. The loss of the forest canopy also led to severe soil erosion, and their crop yields began to fail. The island's bird population was hunted to extinction. Faced with starvation and dwindling resources, the once stable society descended into chaos and brutal civil war. Archaeological evidence from this dark period shows a massive increase in the production of sharp, obsidian spearheads, called mata'a. The oral traditions of the island speak of this time as an age of terror, of clan warfare, and even of cannibalism. The very faith that had driven them to greatness had led them to ruin. And in a final tragic act of desecration, the warring clans began to topple the moai of their rivals. They would pull down the great statues from their ahus, a symbolic act of destroying the mana and the spirit of their enemies' ancestors. When the first European explorers arrived at the island in 1722, on Easter Sunday, they found a desolate, barren, treeless landscape. The population had crashed to just a few thousand impoverished people, living in squalor. And almost all of the great, magnificent moai were lying face down in the dirt, toppled and broken. The new inhabitants had no memory of who had built the statues or how. The knowledge had been lost in the chaos of the collapse. The story of Rapa Nui is a powerful and deeply tragic cautionary tale. It is the story of a civilization that, in its obsessive devotion to its gods and its ancestors, consumed the very island that gave it life. It is a haunting microcosm of our own world, a small, isolated island in the vast ocean of space, a silent warning written in stone of what can happen when a society exhausts its finite resources. The great moai, those that have been raised again, stand as silent witnesses to both a spectacular human achievement and a catastrophic and self-inflicted end. Chapter 9. The Quest for Atlantis. There is one name that echoes through our history like a half-remembered dream. It is a name that speaks of a magnificent golden civilization, a technologically advanced island paradise that held power over the ancient world, and then, in a single, terrible moment, vanished forever beneath the waves. The name is Atlantis. It is the ultimate lost city, the legend that has launched 1,000 expeditions, inspired countless books and films, and has become a powerful symbol of a brilliant world lost to time. But is it just a story? Or is the legend of Atlantis the faint, distorted echo of a real, historical catastrophe? Our quest begins where the story itself began, in the 4th century BC, with the great Greek philosopher Plato. The entire legend of Atlantis, everything we think we know about it, comes from just 2 of his philosophical dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. In these texts, Plato has the character Critias tell a story that he says has been passed down through his family for generations, a story that originated with the great Athenian statesman Solon, who, in turn, had heard it from a group of wise Egyptian priests. The story they told was of a mighty empire that existed 9,000 years before their time. Its home was the island of Atlantis, which lay in the Atlantic Ocean, just beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the modern-day Strait of Gibraltar. It was a vast island, larger than North Africa and Asia combined, and from it, its kings ruled over a great naval empire. The capital city of Atlantis was a marvel of engineering and beauty. It was a series of perfect concentric rings of land and water, connected by great canals and bridges. At its very center, on a hill, stood the royal palace and the temple to the sea god Poseidon, the divine ancestor of the Atlantean kings. The city was a place of unimaginable wealth. The walls were covered in precious metals, bronze, tin, and a mysterious gleaming red metal known as orichalcum, which was said to be second only to gold in value. The temples had roofs of ivory and statues of pure gold. For many generations, the Atlanteans were a noble and virtuous people, their divine nature pure. But as time passed, their human nature began to dominate. They became filled with greed, arrogance, and a lust for power. Finally, in an act of supreme hubris, they launched an unprovoked war of conquest against Athens and the peoples of the Mediterranean. But the ancient Athenians, in Plato's story, were a perfect and virtuous society, and they heroically repelled the Atlantean invasion, saving the freedom of the known world. And it was then that the gods turned their judgment upon Atlantis. In a single, terrible day and night of violent earthquakes and floods, the island of Atlantis was swallowed by the sea and vanished forever, leaving behind only a layer of impassable mud. For most of history, scholars have understood Plato's story for what it likely was: a philosophical allegory, a cautionary tale. He created the fictional, hubristic empire of Atlantis to serve as a foil for his own vision of an ideal, ancient Athens. It was a story about the dangers of imperial arrogance and moral decay. But in the 19th century, the story took on a new life. An American writer and politician named Ignatius Donnelly published a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, which argued that Atlantis was a real, historical place, the source of all the world's ancient civilizations. The book was a massive success, and it launched the modern obsession with finding the lost city, an obsession that has led to countless expeditions and wild theories, linking Atlantis to everything from the Bermuda Triangle to extraterrestrials. But is there a more plausible scientific explanation behind the myth? Many historians and archaeologists believe there is. They believe the story of Atlantis may be the faint, garbled historical memory of the single greatest natural disaster of the ancient world, the catastrophic eruption of the volcanic island of Thera. Around 1600 BC, in the heart of the Greek Bronze Age, a civilization of incredible sophistication, peace, and beauty flourished on the island of Crete. These were the Minoans. They were the dominant naval power of their age. Their great palaces, like Knossos, were vibrant centers of art and culture, and their trade network stretched across the entire Aegean Sea. They were a real-life naval empire, much like Plato's Atlanteans. Just 70 miles to the north of Crete lay the island of Thera, now known as the beautiful Greek island of Santorini. In the Bronze Age, it was a single, large, circular island with a volcano at its center. And around 1600 BC, that volcano erupted with a force that is almost impossible to comprehend. It was one of the largest volcanic explosions in all of human history, many times more powerful than the eruption of Krakatoa. The island of Thera was blown apart, its center collapsing into the sea, creating the great caldera we see today. The eruption would have sent a plume of ash and gas tens of thousands of feet into the atmosphere, blotting out the sun and causing global temperatures to drop. But the most devastating effect would have been the tsunamis. The collapse of the volcano would have generated a series of colossal waves, some perhaps hundreds of feet high, which would have radiated outwards across the Aegean Sea at the speed of a modern jet. These tsunamis would have struck the northern coast of Crete, the heartland of the Minoan civilization, with unimaginable force. Their great coastal towns, their harbors, and their entire fleet, the source of their power and wealth, would have been obliterated in an instant, washed away by a great wall of water. The Minoan civilization was not destroyed overnight, but it was a mortal blow from which they never fully recovered, leaving them vulnerable to invasion and eventual collapse. And here, the parallels with Plato's story become tantalizing. We have a real, powerful, and advanced naval empire, the Minoans. We have its sudden and catastrophic destruction by a natural disaster involving earthquakes and a great flood. We have the memory of a great island civilization that vanished. And most importantly, we have the Egyptian connection. The Egyptians were major trading partners of the Minoans. Their scribes would have certainly recorded the devastating eruption and the sudden collapse of their powerful neighbor. Is it possible that the story of this real Bronze Age apocalypse was preserved in the temple records of Egypt for over 1,000 years? And that, when Solon visited, the priests told him a garbled, exaggerated version of this ancient memory, a story of a great island empire destroyed in a single day and night, which Plato would later adapt for his own philosophical purposes. We will likely never know for sure, but the Minoan hypothesis remains the most compelling explanation for the origin of the world's most enduring legend. Atlantis, then, is not a place to be found with a treasure map. It is a story that exists in the fascinating gray area between myth and memory, a philosophical fable with the faint, tragic echo of a real-world apocalypse at its heart. And so, we end our journey. From a lost army in the sands of Egypt, to an impossible computer in the depths of the sea, to a silent city in India, to a coded book that cannot be read, to a ring of stones that charts the heavens, and finally, to a sunken island that haunts our dreams. The ancient world is not a dead or a fully known place. It is a landscape filled with haunting questions, with silent witnesses to forgotten worlds, and with mysteries that still wait to be solved. It is a profound and humbling reminder of all that we have lost, and all that is still waiting, in the deep, to be discovered. And now, having journeyed to the very edge of our history, you too can rest.